Hello everybody, and I'm switching up things. I'm staying with different realities in original Torg, but I thought that maybe now, after I've done Living Land and Nile Empire, it might be better, instead of going completely to other invading realms, invading realities, to do ones that were kind of based off of Living Land and Nile Empire that came later. But since all the material for original Torg is out, and it's not like it's new or anything, being 30 years old, I figured that maybe now would be the best time. So if you watch the first two videos for the settings, Living Land and Nile Empire, then these might make more sense than me waiting until the end and giving these realities my review, because then you might have forgotten what Living Land and Nile Empire were all about. So with this extra bonus reality context, I would like to go through Terra and the land below. So Terra was one of the last realities that the original Torg had. And I say reality, this was not an invading cosm. This was not a cosm that took direct was not directly involved in the possibility wars on Core Earth. This was the realm, the reality that Dr. Mobius and the Nile Empire came from. But basically, while Dr. Mobius had kind of like a little island on Terra that had the Nile Empire axioms and world laws, he, as I said before, was cursed, that he could never take over and rule Terra. So he kind of left a little piece so that he could come back when needed, and then he just jumped from cosm to cosm, and as he took over him, he made his various empires, First Empire, Second Empire, with Earth being the 10th empire. With Terra, Terra stayed the same. So as Mobius went on, he gained possibility energy, and one of the things that I mentioned that possibility energy a High Lord can do with it is they can alter their axioms and they can alter world laws. It does take a lot of possibility energy, and even though he did take over 9 different cosms and basically suck them dry of possibility energy, just enough to kind of leave a remnant. They weren't completely balls of ash and nothingness, but he was able to boost some axioms. He really didn't do so with the world laws because it takes a lot. So Terra has different axioms. The originating world kind of still stayed the same. So this does not have the spiritual axiom, and it doesn't have the magic axiom of the Nile Empire. The magic axiom is 11, so it's just a little bit under the 12 of the Nile Empire. But the big hit is spiritual axiom. Spiritual axiom is 9 in Terra instead of a 17. So all of the religion of the Egyptian gods that Mobius boosted, used that possibility energy that he took from invading various cosms. He took that and boosted his spiritual axiom to 17. So here it's still 9. And I want to say it's really close to Core Earth. Core Earth was either 8 or 9. When we get to Core Earth, that reality of the setting, then you'll see that it's pretty close to just what we have it as Earth. Tech is 21, so it's the same as Mobius. It's the same 30s, 40s, beginning of World War I type tech. And a difference also is the social. Here in Terra, the social axiom is 21 and not 20, so it's a little bit more. And you might think, what's the difference between 20 and 21? Well, like I said, Terra came out, one of the very last source books of Torg, the original Torg, and before that, the Space Gods book came out, and the Space Gods book presented psionics, and psionics wasn't tied to one specific axiom, it was tied to 3. And social, you needed a 21. So psionics, if you have the Akashan Space Gods book, you could have some psionics happen with Terra. So where you really wouldn't have your big Egyptian priest casting spells and stuff, or sorry, invoking miracles, you could have some psionics in Terra. So that was a choice. A couple of the other differences were they had new weird science gizmos and gadget rules in Terra. Basically, the premise was Dr. Mobius is a genius, and as I said before, he either invented weird science or was one of the founders of the weird science being made basically on Terra. And then Dr. Mobius has a million plans, and he was like, I did it, and kind of moved on to other things. Those that remained in Terra kind of perfected it. So they actually have different rules on creating gizmos and gadgets. And what you could do is, if you're actually using Terra within the Torg setting, you could choose as a game master, do Nile characters, do they use those gadgets and wizardry, weird science rules, and do the Terrans use the Terra book, source book, weird science and gadgets and gizmos rules, or do you just use one for both of them or the other for both of them? But you as a game master could decide. Personally, I did if a character was from the Nile Empire, then they would, if they wanted to be weird science, they would use those rules. If they were from Terra, they could use the Terran rules, and just kind of to make it a little different. And while Terra didn't was not directly involved in the possibility wars that happened on Core Earth, what they did have was Mobius had those maelstrom bridges, those connections from empire to empire to empire, and you could have a few Terrans that kind of could slip through. So that was always a possibility. And I did that. Basically, I personally, as a game master, allowed any Nile Empire or Terran template that was not a religious, an Egyptian religion themed, like a priestess of an Egyptian deity, or a mathematician or engineer, wizard. And I allowed those to be either Terran or Nile. Basically, when the player decided that they wanted to use that template, I would say, even though it says Nile Empire, you could choose Terra. And they might ask why, and I said, well, the weird, if you get into a weird science, that will be a little bit different. You could get psionics, that's a little bit different. And the other thing was, this book introduced pulp sorcery. So where the magic of Isle was kind of based on the Egyptian, the Terran Egyptian religion, pulp sorcery could take the comic book superpowers and make them into spells, and there was a kind of a different subsystem that allowed that, as well as you could choose to do magic normal. I say normal because they gave it a comic flair. There were various sub-rules in Terra. So you could have like a sorcerer supreme type character doing pulp sorcery that would mimic powers, the superpowers, or because you could do both. You could use the normal wizard rules of casting spells normally, with just there is various little differences that you could use. So that was something that was interesting. And I usually, like I said, I kind of split them off, but I allow people to use one or the other if they were a non-Egyptian based template. And then they could choose Nile Empire or this. If you went with pulp sorcery, though, then you're Terran. If you're psychic, you have to be Terran. But that gave that little difference type thing. This book was kind of presented as, and also you could have a full campaign on Terra. They had Martians, there were little green men on Mars, and things like that. So you could use Terra as a setting that would be pretty completely pulp comic based game. And it was kind of, they used the Torg system, and they had offshoots of it that weren't even with Torg, like Terra later, but this was kind of a border between, it's still Torg, but it's not directly involved with the possibility wars, and same mechanics but completely different, not associated with Torg. So you could have a completely Terran campaign. And one thing you could also do with Terra is, if you wanted kind of an invasion and you didn't want to deal with all the multiple realities hitting core Earth, you could have some High Lord come, like one other High Lord come and try to invade Terra. And that would be something that you could do as a game master, as kind of a small possibility war. It's just your Storm Knights are from Terra or from whatever realm you wish to invade Terra. And that could be interesting. So that is what Terra was. It wasn't directly part of the possibility wars, but it was indirectly connected through the Nile Empire. And that's also why I use the term cosms and realms and reality. So Terra was a cosm, but it had no realms. There was no Terra parts with the bounded and stelae that were on core Earth. And so that was an option. The next one I want to deal with is the land below. And basically the land below, the theory behind that was sometimes High Lords make alliances and help each other. And sometimes, or in this instant, I won't say sometimes, in this one particular instant, two darkness devices got together and they decide to cooperate. And they made a reality that at the time was subterranean. It was kind of where a hollow earth type thing could exist, or at least below the ground earth, where you could go through tunnels and caves systems, and then you could open up into big worlds that maybe there wasn't a sun that the planet that Earth went around, but maybe they had one of them in here, the main setting had like a globe, like a small sun type thing up on the ceiling that gave warmth and why people could live. It wasn't like a complete sun where it would be too hot and everybody would die, but it was just like a magical thing. And one of the things here is, since it was these two darkness devices kind of cooperating to make this reality, it was not a cosm and it was not a realm. It was just a reality, and it had its own axioms. And the axioms were kind of like a mix between Living Land and the Nile Empire. So the tech was 10. So the tech was higher than the Living Land, but much lower than Nile Empire. And 10 is kind of where you can get bronze. So metalworking and stuff was possible. Most of the things that they presented in this book were still more primitive, but there were at least one society that had metalworking in it. And you could, what I want to say, social was 8, so it was bumped up one higher than the Living Land. So you could get a little bit higher than just tribal and clan type things. You could get actual governments. And again, the one culture that had kind of bronze working and metal working, they also had more of a Greek type, ancient Greek type society, maybe even Romanish. So city-states you could have in here. The magic was interesting. The magic was at 12. So the magic was much higher than the Living Lands of 1, but it was much it was the same, sorry, as Nile Empire, but there were no real wizards. In Land Below, the magic was world magic, and it created things called the Law of Wonder. And the Law of Wonder meant that big, wondrous things that probably the tech and stuff wouldn't be able to match could exist. And here is what I consider, it keeps the pulpishness of the Nile Empire. And one of the things that I kind of saw it as Conan, which is a low fantasy. You don't have all these spellcasters running around and throwing fireballs and stuff like that. You could have priests, and you could have magicians, sorcerers, who could do kind of slow magic. They could gain their power, you know, through rituals and stuff. And you could have these like so-called lost civilizations. Since the whole realm was kind of made, it kind of didn't have a past, but it was made as if it had a past. So you could find ancient ruins of lost civilizations and things like that that fit into the land below through its magic. So its magic was 12, its tech was 10, its social was 8, and its spiritual was 17. So the spiritualness was the same as the Nile Empire. Basically, the Nile Empire was able to keep that because 24 with the living land was so high. So you could have, there were priests that could invoke miracles and do that type of things, and they had various cultures in it that could have their miracles and stuff. A lot of people saw this the land below as kind of a fix to the living land. It was different, but the harshness of the living land, like I said, the law of losing things, the law of decay, the deep mist, the getting lost, all of that hindered Storm Knights. Here, they didn't have that. You could still have that savagery, that jungle type setting. You could have dinosaurs. They had a knockoff of King Kong in here, and I'm sure Torg fans will get, like super Torg fans, fanatics will get maybe upset that I said it was a King Kong knockoff, but it was a big gorilla, you know. So to me, it's like King Kong, and it was just an interesting world in this, interesting setting, I guess, a reality. Like I said, they had one big domed world under it called, and I'll probably pronounce it wrong, but Maritika, and that's kind of what had many cultures in it, and you could go around if you got lost. And it was also brought in a thing that you could go subterranean, and you could go, you know, through these various little mini worlds, and then you could come up, and you could come up in a completely different realm. So it was a way that game masters could connect two different realms instead of having them, you know, travel by boat or by plane or by car, depending how that worked. So you could have adventures, you know, in a completely different reality while traveling. So that's something that was interesting. I want to go through the world laws. I believe they were very similar to. They had the law of wonders. Like I said, that's what the magic propped up, that you could have these great ancient lost ruins, civilizations, and things that might not seem like they would work, but they worked because you had that. You did have the law of action, and so you could do that thing where you could spend that extra possibility on it. So they were, and the law of savagery. And basically that kind of heightened rage and stuff in combat. So this was a kind of a Conan-ish sword and sorcery without a lot of metal armor. You could also go on other comic tropes that were kind of that, lost civilizations, cultures, and things like that. The world laws of Terra, I forgot to say, were pretty much the same as the Nile Empire. Law of drama, law of action, law of morality. So all of those fit. I didn't talk about it because they were the same, but I should mention that those were the same. So the land below, at a time, like I said, people liked it a lot better, and it actually supplanted the eastern part of the living land. At one point, the eastern living land kind of fell apart. The land below came up on that area. It was no longer bound by stele, but it's kind of like a zone that its reality took place, or was in that same section. It was exactly the same, and they called it the land above. The other thing is, this did allow pulp powers. Pulp powers weren't contradictory, but the pulp powers they gave, or actually they were, I want to say, contradictory in land below. They were different. They did the same thing where they cost possibility energy to be able to use and to be able to keep, but these were One's more like you could have an animal companion, or you could talk to animals, kind of like Tarzan-ish, and things like that. There are more that savage world type pulp powers, and not really the shooting beams or flying. Those were contradictions. But I did a thing in my own, is the Terra book also had more pulp powers. I basically allowed the Terra Nile pulp powers to work interchangeably. Depending on what type it was, I either said it was or wasn't a contradiction, and that's why I was confused, because my own little home world or home rule type thing was going on. But Land Below was an interesting addition. Just to mention, Torg Eternity kind of took all the things that the Land Below fixed in the Living Land and kind of smushed the two together, and they only have the Living Land. They do have the Maritica realm, but it's considered Living Land axioms. So basically they just took the cool stuff from here, put it in the Living Land, updated the Living Land, and most people are happy with the Living Land and Torg Eternity. But in original Torg, they are separate. It was two darkness devices who got together to kind of make this new reality. For whatever reason, they were both considering maybe that this would create a being that would be possibly a High Lord replacement. And then they give a couple of suggestions on who might be that High Lord replacement. So that's one of the things, and it's 20 minutes, so with two different realities. But I did figure that I would take Terra and Land Below, because Terra is what Nile Empire was, and you could easily play or game master in Terra using Torg rules, no problem. You can easily take Torg or Terran player characters, Storm Knights, and bring them into Torg. They gave a reason on how that could happen, so you can do that. And the Land Below was always that alternative, that if you wanted to play the Living Land, but the Living Land annoyed you too much, but you still wanted that savage jungle Tarzan, Conan, low fantasy type thing, sword and sorcery, you could do that through the Land Below. So that was always a choice. So bonus content of the setting, I mean, it's bonuses and it's happening now, and I'm not waiting to the end, and it's going to be a 25, less than 25 minute discussion on the realm, and 2 in 1. But I figured after I did the Nile Empire, I thought it's probably really good to go ahead and throw in Terra and Land Below now. So you have a Terra pulp comics without the Egyptian religion influence, and then the almost low fantasy, low pulp sword and sorcery pulp comic type things with the Land Below. So again, I am Lehman Crafton, aka Zorval Chan, Less Than Guru, and I hope you enjoyed. If you did, you can hit like. If you did not at all, then you can hit dislike. If you want to see future content, which should be coming out pretty bang at least through the original Torg series that I'm doing, then you can hit subscribe. So I thank you very much for watching, and until next time, bye.